Hey, and welcome back to the number one podcast in the world, the Cellarcast, episode 172. So, you might have noticed, as is becoming common, that I didn't post a podcast last week. Well, that actually has a good reason, which is that I got sick. I got a pretty nasty throat cold, which in this business, like this is a business, like I make any money off of this, is one of the worst types of illnesses you can catch. There was straight up about a week where I just could not record. My voice, like, there was a couple days on either end where, like, I probably could have recorded, but my voice was really, really rough sounding, you know. But there were, especially like in the middle of it, was I couldn't talk to anybody. Like, my voice was so shot. So that was kind of annoying. It also, I was sick to the degree, it was definitely a cold. I didn't test for COVID. I don't think it was. At this point, it doesn't matter because I've isolated long enough. I also just did not have the capacity to focus on anything. Like, I couldn't focus on... anything that required any kind of focused intent was very difficult to just exhaust. I couldn't read because my eyes would just get tired after 5 minutes. I couldn't play games. It was a real bummer. So, thankfully now I am back. I am healthy completely. I'm going to Fab Night tonight. I'm going to play more Flesh and Blood at the locals tonight. Unfortunately, I missed last week. I'll tell you a funny story. Okay, I had shawarma for the first time 2 weeks ago. It was after locals, and I got invited out by some of the doodads there. And they said, "Hey, well, we're just gonna go to like a local place and get some food." They usually go to this shawarma restaurant. I'd actually never had shawarma. If you've never had it, it's basically just it's like a wrap, usually with meat and vegetables in it. Like a Middle Eastern burrito is the closest comparison. So we get there, and I'm kind of a cheapskate. You know, I don't like spending money in general on stuff. But I was like, okay, I'm here. You know, I knew I was going to buy stuff. So I'm prepared for that. I didn't expect it to be too expensive. It's kind of a little hole in the wall place. And I pick up the menu and I start doing what I always do, which is looking for the cheapest option available. And I am scanning down. It's not a very large menu. And I flip it over and I find that the cheapest item is a hamburger. And I was like, oh, I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to, like, there's like the lady behind the register is clearly like a Middle Eastern lady. This is clearly like an ethnic place, like an ethnically owned place. I don't want to be the guy who goes to an ethnic restaurant and I'm the white guy who orders a hamburger. So I was forced to, I forced myself to pay $3 extra. It was, the burger was like $10, and then I paid $13 for the cheapest wrap that they had, which was a chicken shawarma. It was assembled in a kind of an obnoxious way, where they put all the chicken on one side and all the vegetables on the other side. So, you know, my mouth can only open so large. I'm not snake enough to unhinge my jaw yet. So I always had to, I could only take like an all chicken or an all vegetable bite. Nevertheless, I mean, it was pretty good. It was fairly healthy. You know, I had like a hummus dressing, like a sauce over it. And it was a lot of fun. I did something social. Aren't you? I was telling my mom about it, and she was like really proud of me to an embarrassing degree because I'm such a homebody. Uh, yeah. That was my way of leading into. I got to like warm up my brain, right? Just before sitting down, as I was writing, I made a bunch of headway on the script for the next video this afternoon, or just earlier this morning. And before I was about to sit down to record, I decided to just watch some YouTube videos to relax after writing for a few hours. And I watched some really good videos from a small channel called Crocodile Gambit. So the first one was called The Lost Art of Collectivist RPGs. It's like a 45-minute video, and it was really interesting. He's a German guy, and the video is about comparing Skyrim to Gothic 2, which is a franchise I don't know very much about. I've heard people say very good things about the Gothic games, but I don't really know anything about them. And it was a great breakdown of the structure of Gothic and kind of what the series is about, as well as comparing and contrasting it to an American RPG in Skyrim, because Gothic is German. They are German, yes. It's just really interesting, and like comparing essentially the broad strokes are that Skyrim he calls Skyrim an individualist RPG, because the way that the player is empowered allows them to kind of just do practically anything that they want, regardless of how much sense it actually makes in the setting or how other characters would present. Like, the player doesn't really fit into society unless they want to, or the player only fits into society insofar as they can like benefit from it. Whereas in Gothic, which has Gothic has a very similar, like, if compared to like Gothic 2, there's this very similar objective, which is, hey, dragons are back. Go tell the important guy who rules the city that dragons are back. And in Skyrim, you just walk up and open the doors and talk to the Jarl, and he just immediately believes you, and everyone just takes you at your word. In Gothic 2, you walk up to the gates, and the guards are like, dude, who are you? Do you have a job? Get a fucking job, scumbag. And like the first several hours of the game, like 10 to 15 hours of the game, are spent gaining class mobility of like getting jobs and aligning yourself with different guilds, which opens up different quest lines in different parts of the different parts of the city. And then only then, after doing all of that and actually ingraining yourself into the social hierarchy, are you able to even talk to the guy. Which is really funny, like a strong cultural distinction. He has another video that's really interesting. It's a lot shorter. It's only about 20 minutes. It's called Barbarians Attack: How Video Games Teach You Expansionism. It was originally put together for a conference, about some Canadian conference about video games. And it has a really interesting, introduced me to a really interesting concept called, I'm gonna get the words in the right order. Procedural rhetoric, or rhetorical procedure. It's one of the, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. Procedural rhetoric. It is procedural rhetoric. So what that means is, rhetoric is just like speaking and communicating ideas, right? So the same way that we understand that words can communicate ideas, images can communicate ideas, so too can you communicate ideas via procedures or the doing of things. And this is very, perhaps most applicable in art to video games, because video games are defined by being able to do things. So it's essentially the idea that game mechanics and systems communicate ideas to the player about things, something. Specifically, in this case, ways that different mechanics reflect and promote ideas about native inhabitants of lands, as well as the ethics of expansionism and colonialism, imperialism, all the isms. And it was really interesting. It essentially took 3 games as case studies, those being the Civilization series, Fallout 4, namely Civ 5, Fallout 4, and Conan Exiles, and drew comparisons between them as to how they represented all games that include building settlements as well as sort of landless, settlementless raiders, savages, what have you, and how they reflect these different ideas. And it was really interesting because I had never thought about it in this way, but especially comparing it to the various rhetoric from like colonizing people about native people. There's some potentially troubling ideas, and I think that's something that's worth talking about. And that was sort of the crux of what I wanted to get to. So, like, for instance, a very common theme in so-called 4X games like Civilization is the idea that there are these barbarians roaming the open lands, and via mechanics, these barbarian groups do not have land of their own. On the map, territory that's owned by the various different cultures and civilizations is represented by colors, whereas unclaimed territory is usually represented by like a green, or there's some way of representing it, right? And that is the universally understood wilderness, which is the sole home of barbarians and savages, roving bands who do not truly own the land that they live on. So how historically, how do we in the West, or specifically a big focus on America, which makes sense, how do we in America, how have we historically understood what makes someone a legitimate culture? And the answer is that legitimate cultures are ones who essentially exploit the resources of the land that they're on, and they defend it militaristically. So farming the land, mining the land, doing things with it, building on it. Nomadic peoples, or people who don't exploit the land to as intensive a degree, are considered to essentially just be disconnected from that territory. They don't truly own it, and therefore it's nobody's country. And in that way, they're almost brought to the same level as being animals, no matter whether, even if they are people. And there's many writings that are cited throughout the video of different scholars and historical people at the time trying to reconcile the idea that that Native Americans could be so close to people, yet so lacking in the qualities that define a proper civilization, that they are grotesque. They are like this halfway thing between animals and people, and that's like disgusting. They also do not have culture. This is something else like that. This is an ancient historical idea. I mean, I like to toss around as a joke, I like to call people Philistines. That comes from the Bible. That comes from the story of, most famously, the story of, why can't I remember his name? Someone in Goliath. It's not Jonah. Why can't I remember? David and Goliath. That's what it is. David and Goliath. Goliath belonged to the Philistines, who were like some ethnic tribal group that did not been extinct for a long time, and were considered to be brutish people without any culture at all that was recognized, at least by the, I don't know, probably Hebrews who wrote the Bible, or the Torah, I guess. True civilizations exploit their land and produce culture, and things that illegitimate groups, wandering tribes of barbarians, do not. They don't own the land that they live on, and therefore it's okay to just take it from them. Actually, it's morally correct to take it from them. And this is pretty interesting to me, because, well, one, I'd never really thought about it in this way. And for two, I think that, you know, there are a lot of people who enjoyed these games. I put some hours into Fallout 4 way back when it came out. I've played a couple 4X games that I've enjoyed. Usually not like, there's only like I've tried to play like more Civilization styled ones, and I usually just kind of get bored. But I think that there's something interesting in the sense that you can agree. I'm sure that there are people who could totally see the point that's made here. I'm not saying Civilization is like, there's like a very fine line, which is you're saying, I don't think Civilization is inherently racist, but it reflects ideas that are in common with racists. Does that make sense? There's like a real nuance there. A lot of people enjoy these games on a mechanical level and don't really care. Like, there are a lot of people, like, I'm sure that there's people who enjoy them just for the historical value, right? Of all the historical cultures and people represented, right? But I'm sure there are just as many, if not more, who just like Civ games or Fallout or Conan Exiles just for the mechanical. They find the mechanics interesting and satisfying, and it gets them to make interesting decisions. And they could care less about whatever potential ideas are implied. Whatever ideas are implied by these mechanics and these systems. Whoa, my ear just popped. Whoa, I just randomly swallowed and my ear popped. Everything's super clear now. So how do you kind of reconcile that? And it's something I'd pose to the comments. I was thinking about this, like, okay, Birth of a Nation. If not anyone's unfamiliar with Birth of a Nation, it's a film that is frequently taught in American film schools or film classes. And it's considered a classic. It is also explicitly racist. It is responsible for partly responsible for revitalizing the Ku Klux Klan in America, and is about how black people are an evil, savage, practically inhuman race, which is going to destroy the pure good white people and like kidnap and kill and rape our women and take everything. Horrible, reprehensible messaging, and the fact that it's been taught for so long is a source of controversy. And a lot of people say, like, well, so there are other ways, there are other films that you could use as examples of the techniques that are that you use Birth of a Nation for. The reason that it's taught isn't just because, I'm sure there are, historical implications depending on the particular class you take. But really the reason it's taught is because it is essentially like the proto-blockbuster. Birth of a Nation was massively successful, not just because it appealed to a certain racist worldview, but also because it was unbelievably exciting for the time that it was released. What year was it? 1915. Fucking not a lot of movies exist, and the way that it builds tension, the way it builds drama, up to this insane triumphant climax, was like people hadn't seen that shit before, and it kind of rocked their world. So from a technical point of view, it's incredibly influential. There's a whole generation of American filmgoers who were highly influenced. Those people went on to create. There are absolutely filmmakers who were inspired to make movies because they saw Birth of a Nation. And whether or not they internalized its message or agreed with it, they thought it was the hypest shit in the world because of the way that it was presented to them. And this is like a legacy. It's an artistic legacy that's left by this one film. Obviously, exciting blockbuster action dramas, thrillers, you could call it, are not required to have horrible racist themes in them. But the techniques that are present in Birth of a Nation are still used to this day. So, and this goes for, there's other things like this. There's many debates over the potential racial readings of like King Kong, also a massively influential, incredibly innovative movie. There's a lot of cases like this. So if you want to say that the mechanics, because there's like a distinction to be made here. The techniques I would not say are racist. They're being used in a racist way in Birth of a Nation. They're used for a racist end. Could you potentially say that the mechanics, certain systems found in games that create certain dynamics are inherently, let's say in this case, like pro-imperialism? Could you say that just them being present is? Or do you think that they could be in a context that is so divorced from the real world that they no longer have that connotation? Would you have to put them in a context that is so fantastical? Could you make a historical game with the same systems and mechanics as Civilization and not imply those things? Or would you have to fundamentally adjust them? And this is, I think that this is the kind of like the heart of the idea of procedural rhetoric, is that the doing itself, the mechanics itself, make a statement. Of course, there are people who are going to debate that, like, the premise, debate even the premise of procedural rhetoric, although I think that's silly. I think it's definitely open for debate sometimes whether or not these things even mean these things. I don't know. Leave a comment. I'm very curious. I think it's an interesting discussion. Of course, I'm glad that I generally have, I think, a pretty thoughtful audience, because there's a shocking amount of people who hate thinking about things. Specifically, like gamers or people who identify as gamers and people into nerdy, ironically enough, quote unquote nerdy, intellectual, traditionally, like hobbies traditionally done by intellectuals, they want to be book smart, but they don't really want to think about what they're doing or what it means or anything. I was recently reading a lot about the concept of race in Dungeons and Dragons, and I think it gets really interesting because people will say, well, it's just based on Tolkien, and it's like, do you not think that Tolkien might have? So you say that there are certain implications by the way that Dungeons and Dragons handles race that aligns with certain worldviews, and someone says, no, doesn't mean anything. It's that like that because it's based on Tolkien. You're like, okay, do you think that Tolkien might have, a guy who was born in like the 1800s might have had certain worldviews? I'm not saying he was racist, but that he might have just via osmosis injected some of that into his writings. I mean, he himself, you can go read interviews with Tolkien, and he over the course of his life definitely had like shifting opinions on how he handled representing analogs for real world things in Middle Earth. It's pretty interesting. Also, it gets interesting when you find out that Gary Gygax, one of the co-creators of Dungeons and Dragons, was like a self-proclaimed misogynist and probably racist. He identified as a biological determinist and believed that he was definitely a misogynist. He straight up believed that women's brains were just wired in such a way where they could not enjoy things like Dungeons and Dragons. And it's like, okay, obviously he is not there were so many rule books and different editions and different campaigns and all that was written by totally different people, right? But like he also did set up like the precedent for a lot of stuff. A lot of people probably never thought about this, and a lot of people are hostile to the idea of thinking about these things, and that's what I find interesting. There's a fascinating anti-intellectual streak in a lot of the hobbies and kind of spaces that I enjoy. People who, again, they hate thinking about shit, and not only do they hate it, if they catch you thinking about shit, dude, that they are gonna get so mad. How dare you? How dare you think about things? It's really interesting. I have to imagine it comes from some kind of insecurity. Like, people, like, I don't feel like I am smart enough to analyze the artwork that I consume, and it intimidates me. Maybe people have had I'm being very charitable here. Maybe people have had bad experiences with, people who interpret stuff more try to actually analyze stuff more. People who interpret artwork more analytically. Maybe they've had bad experiences with that in school or something like that, or felt belittled or something. And it's like when they see someone who does that, they're like, so first of all, they personally are like, fuck that. I'm not going to think at all. I'm not even going to try. Like this kind of spiteful response. And then they see someone else trying to actually be a little analytical or look at something through a different lens. And that's like threatening to them, because they're very comfortable in the idea that they don't have to think about anything. Almost, I wonder if it's like, I don't have to think about it. And once you're so ingrained in the mindset that you shouldn't have to think about something critically, that there actually is nothing. Like, I'm not being lazy. There is literally nothing here to analyze. So when something does, you're like, something in your brain goes off and you're like, oh, fuck. Oh, no. Oh, God, I have to stop that. Shut up. Stop thinking about stuff. I think it might actually be more common that a lot of people just pick and choose what analysis they want to listen to, and it usually ends up aligning with probably ends up aligning with their pre-existing notions about things. So do I have a point to this little spiel, this little rant? I don't know. I don't listen to those people. I try to ignore them. I like to actually have interesting discussions about artwork and trying to interpret it and stuff. I'm like, sometimes I am like a little, it's almost like unrelated, but occasionally I'm like surprised at like a lack of, I don't know. Like I've made a couple videos in the past where the TLC video, the Tender Loving Care video for me got kind of a personal streak to it. Like there was a personal aspect to it in that one of the reasons I wanted to make it wasn't just because I found it the game so interesting, or that I connected to it in a way. Like I really stuck my head in there. But also that when I went to look up discussion about the game, I was really disappointed with like the caliber of it. There was a lot of negative discussion from people who just, in my opinion, I don't know, either had very weird readings of the game that I didn't relate to, or were just kind of like very surface level, like, what? John Hurt asks you about sex? Isn't this crazy? And then just dismissing like anything that could be gleaned, that anything that you could actually draw from the game of like any ideas it's trying to put out. And then likewise, the positive reviews, like the positive discussion of TLC was also very shallow, I thought, and just kind of like, yeah, it's kind of entertaining for like a few hours, kill a few hours like that. And I was like, I feel like no one's talking about the shit that seems very like, I don't know, right? Like I almost feel a little crazy when I picked up on this thing, like in the first cutscene, the first scene that you watch, and like the different viewpoints of the characters that you get. And then you go read their diaries. And then you see them in these different situations, and the player has knowledge that the characters don't. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of interesting. And then you go into the bathroom, and there's a book about voyeurism. And I'm like, oh, that is very intentional. I feel like this game is trying to suggest something to me. Like, there's something to think about. And then you start looking at the rest of the game with the idea of voyeurism, observation, and the way that fits into how the characters are written and the different versions of scenes you get. Harvester was much the same. I went and like read and watched like other people's analyses and videos on Harvester, and a lot of them just kind of stop at talking about the violence. And I thought that was like a huge missed opportunity, because the game like straight up tells you what it's about. And yes, violence is one of those things. And you'll get, Gilbert, is it Gilbert Austin or Austin Gilbert? It's so messed up that he has both those, that he has the two first names. You'll get the creator of the game talking about the violence, but then like there's just a scene where the Wasp Woman goes on a big monologue that is so obviously like a series of thematic statements, and then no one ever brings that up. No one ever is like, hey, here's a bunch of ideas the game is directly feeding to you that you can see at the beginning of the game. As soon as you leave the house, you can go meet her. Would it be worth analyzing the rest of the game with these ideas in mind? And like, no one seemed to do that. Because like once you start doing that, you're like, holy shit, it's like the whole game is about these things that she talks about. Sacrifice, consumption, the social order and the perceptions that people have of your role in society. Like it's so ingrained into like practically every single character. It's everywhere. And I'm like, am I crazy? Like, I don't think I'm a genius for noticing this stuff. I think I'm just paying attention to what the game is telling me. That doesn't really have anything to do with anti-intellectualism. It's just, I don't know. It's like, I like thinking about stuff like this. And sometimes, yeah, I don't, it's kind, I don't know. You kind of get a sense, you have to kind of develop like a gut instinct for it. Like, I'm working on a video about something right now that I don't think is very deep. I don't think it runs very deep. It's not going for anything that is particularly... There's not some life-changing commentary about human society within, right? I still think it's interesting and worth talking about, and it's interesting to me, and interesting enough for me to want to make a video about it. But like, I find that when you watch something, read something, play something, listen to something, there are like little tells. That's the best way I can describe it. There's like little tells that the creator put some thought into it, that the creator is suggesting something beyond the scope of what's literally on, like, in front of you. Like, okay, yeah, on the surface, this is a story about this, but hey, there's like a line right here, and you're like, that seems like it goes a little beyond the scope. Like, it's a little beyond the scope of what's directly happening in the plot. Does that give us a clue as to maybe what they were pulling at? And sometimes stories really are just created with no real like deeper commentary to them. You know, I don't want to like legitimize the curtains are blue kind of people or that kind of argument, but sometimes I will admit, like, the story's not that deep. Although that doesn't preclude it from like being analyzed, right? There's many different perspectives this is why I don't like when people talk about art is political or all art is not political or what, you know, because I think I've said this before on this podcast. My thinking is that politics is one lens through which you can analyze something, and there are many lenses, right? Have I ever talked about oh my god, I don't want to, this is like a whole topic. Look up the 4 essences of scripture, and maybe you'll figure out what I'm talking about. But you can take one story, one piece of art, one piece of media, whatever, and it is totally acceptable to look at it in multiple different ways, including literally. It's totally fine to analyze something on a literal level. But I think you also should be open to the idea that there are many ways. There are many different ways that you can look at something that don't negate the other ways. You know, just because I want to read something in a political, put something in a political perspective, in a historical context, in like an ethical analysis, just because I want to do that doesn't mean that your literal reading of it isn't valid. It's fine. In fact, I think most people go into stuff, including me, just reading stuff on a literal level. I think I default to reading things on a literal level until I see things that suggest otherwise, right? For instance, I start a movie and I find out it takes place in a certain time period. Oh, okay. Well, there's a historical context to put this in. There's a historical perspective. This is representing the past. That's one way to analyze it. There are many ways, like, I remember I had a history teacher in high school who just didn't like certain movies because they were not historically accurate. And I was like, I mean, I get it. You're like a big history nerd. But from my perspective, it's like, I think that you should be able to look at something from like multiple lenses. Like, okay, is this historically accurate? No. But is it like a well-constructed film? Is it interesting? Is it exciting? You know, it might very well be. I say this as someone who got all hissy over the Tetris movie not being accurate. Actually, no, I'll back that up. The Tetris movie was not accurate to the real history and was not accurate in a lame way. Like the new story, like the stuff they fabricated for that movie, like was kind of lame and derivative and a little cringe and was less interesting than the real story. Go watch my video about it. Did I have a point to all this? I don't know. I have to respond to a DM real quick. Okay, DM responded to. I'm getting cards out of the bulk box at tonight's local. In other news, gaming, unfortunately, I hate to be the one to break it to you, but gaming is fucking dead. That's right. The Resident Evil 2 remake has sold fewer than 10,000 copies on iOS. Fuck! God damn it! Fuck! So I did not know that there was a version of Resident Evil 2 remake on iOS until I read this headline. And I don't think you did either. I don't have an iPhone, so I can't look it up. I went on the Google Play Store and I searched up Resident Evil 2 remake out of curiosity, and I got a game called Residents of Evil 2. So I don't think that's the same thing. Apparently Capcom has a port of RE2 Remake on iOS devices on the App Store only. So it's like essentially it's free. It is free, but it's only like a small portion, basically like a demo. The first week that the game launched, you could then buy the rest of the game for $10. A couple weeks afterwards, they jacked it up to the intended price, original price, because that $10, that was a sale. The real price is $40. This is I'm reading an article from Video Games Chronicle. It is citing information from mobilegamer.biz, which itself is sourcing from a mobile app tracking service called App Magic. Estimates the game has just passed $100,000 in in-app purchases, which is essentially how many people actually bought the full game. This is compared to other ports of Resident Evil 4, Assassin's Creed Mirage, and Death Stranding. I did not know that these existed. I thought that they stopped doing this. I know that in, there was like a mobile port of Street Fighter 4, I think. And there was they did the Mega Man games, and those were somehow terrible. Those somehow ran badly. What are they called? Mega Man mobiles. Yeah, and you had to get them all individually, which is silly. So yeah, there are iOS ports of Resident Evil 4, RE Village, Death Stranding, and AC Mirage. They have not sold very well. Specifically, this is another article also from VGC. The Assassin's Creed Mirage app had a similar business model where you'd essentially get a demo and then pay for the rest. This time, $50. Now, this is kind of interesting. So here's the thing. When I first heard that there was even a port of this game today, I was like, in my mind, I'm going, okay, this has to be some crunched down version of RE2 Remake. So I looked up some footage of the game, like some benchmarks across a couple different iOS devices. The game looks shockingly good. It looks really good. The bulk box has 0 rares. Fuck! Sorry. Damn it. I'm just getting commons, I guess. I'm trying to build a Florian deck in Flesh and Blood. Anyway, I should really just mute Discord while I'm recording. Right. So the game looks really good and runs for the most part at a pretty stable frame rate. I don't know if stable, but fairly high. It's bouncing, but I don't think in all the footage I saw from the guy doing the benchmarks, plural, never dipped below 30. And in a lot of cases was between 40 and 60, especially if there wasn't a whole lot going on. At worst, you could see the performance hitch a little bit, but still like totally playable. Very similar to playing it on like a medium to low end spec system, like a PC or something. Not bad at all. Like textures, lighting effects, even some reflections, rain effects, and all that. Still looked pretty good. I have no idea how it controls. I don't know if they adapted the control scheme, but it honestly looks like a pretty solid port of the game to iOS. It looks like it ran the best on like an iPad. Although, oh my god, I imagine this thing got just overheated your fucking device so badly. I can only imagine. Probably chews through battery too. But I mean, if you don't have a console and you're a Mac gamer, might be because again, probably chews through battery so fast. Calling this, an experience on the go is a little silly. Like maybe if you're able to shack up to a charger at wherever you're staying, probably not that bad of an experience. To my surprise, I don't know. I didn't look up footage of the RE4 or the Assassin's Creed or the Death Stranding. I didn't look up any of those. But it is kind of shocking that handheld devices are now at the level where they look like last gen, like just one gen behind, which for most cases is more than enough, right? We've talked about that before. Way more than enough for a lot of games. I don't think that if you're playing on mobile, you're necessarily expecting a graphical... There's a lower expectation. It's not going to be a graphical powerhouse showcase. It's not going to be a tech demo. Although it could be a tech demo for the phone, but I digest. And it really... What I find funny about this is not just the concept, because it is kind of cool, right? It is cool that you can actually get this whole game to run pretty well. It's that the business model is so curious, and I don't know why they thought it would work. There was a time, I remember when... It's so messed up to me that I meet kids who were born after the iPhone was already like a thing in society. The iPhone came out in 2007 when I was 5. So I'm not going to pretend like, I was punching in numbers on a rotary phone or anything. But I remember when it was new. And the first 2 or 3 iPhone versions, when that was still integrating into society. I remember when the iPad came out. I remember when all this shit was new. And mobile gaming was a thing that was just starting to take off, right? It was kind of a thing with flip phones. Like it was a very vestigial market. And then with the App Store, which wasn't introduced until the iPhone 2, the second one, I don't remember what they called it. Until the second version, till the second iPhone, the App Store was what really made mobile gaming take off and turned it into like a crazy. I mean, that's just an extension of just the app industry, the mobile app industry. But gaming has always been interesting because there was a time when the market has really shifted and the common pricing models. 99 cents used to be a very standard price for a lot of mobile games. There also used to be, you'd occasionally run into a $5, $10 game. You could go on many, the Google Play Store, the App Store, probably other third-party app stores as well. And you can still find ports of like classic, like retro games and stuff, old Final Fantasies and stuff that they're selling for like $10. And that is, at some point, it became clear, and I don't know if this was a cultural thing or what, but it became clear that people were not willing to pay that much money. I think 99-cent apps still, you'll still see them, but free-to-play, it's really shifted towards free-to-play with microtransactions. Like, that's the model now. And it could be that the audiences consider mobile games to be, there is like a difference, and it's funny because it's a 99 cents versus free. It's a minor upfront cost, but it's still an upfront cost. And I think like psychologically, when there's an upfront cost on something you don't know if you'll like, and there's another thing that you don't know if you'll like, but is free, I think most people are going to opt for the free thing every time. And then, this is kind of like the psychology of how free-to-play models work. Once you're sold, quote-unquote, on the game, like that you like it, people will just be more willing after the fact to support you. Kind of like, I mean, this is kind of like my business model. Like, I give you videos for free. I don't charge for them. YouTube is a free service. You don't even need an account to watch YouTube videos. And then you can choose to donate to me or subscribe to me on Ko-fi or Patreon or, the likes. You get to say, I like this guy's videos so much that I am going to give him money to support him. Thank you very much. And, the model itself, I'm not opposed to. The part that I find interesting is just kind of like, I don't know, the history of it. I want to say that it probably started with a lot of big games. Clash of Clans was probably a big one. That's a free game. League of Legends, not a mobile game, but proved the F2P model. And there were many other console and PC games, mainly PC games, that followed. And I think that it seemed like a really natural extension for the mobile market, which was already seen as a pretty low cost, very low cost price model thing. I didn't phrase that very well. And I don't know what came first, the chicken or the egg. Did people not see mobile games as being in depth enough or as much of an experience? Are mobile games considered, was it that people considered them so throwaway or so kind of ethereal that they weren't willing to pay as much for them? Or was it that mobile games innovated on certain price models that over time got people used to the idea that mobile games are really low cost or just free in most cases? Because at some point, people, just general audiences, I'm like this too. Like, I don't want to pay 99 cents for a game. Like, which is funny because if it's a PC game, if it's like $2, I'm like, oh, hell yeah, I'll buy that. But if it's a mobile game for $2, I'm like, I don't know. because I look at it, I realize I look at it as also, I'm looking for just kind of like sort of a light, casual experience. And despite the fact that that doesn't really mean anything in terms of how intense they are to develop for, that like translates into how much I'm willing to pay, right? Like, this is weird. Okay, leave a comment down below. I'm so curious if anyone else feels the same way. Do you also make that weird kind of correlation? Because it doesn't make a lot of sense. Yeah. Which is why it is so funny to me that Capcom, in the year of our Lord, like, when could this have come out? A couple of years ago? You know, within the last few years, decided that they were going to present people with a version of RE2 Remake that, yes, might have been like a free demo up front, but forced you to pay like $40. Like, okay, I don't know, like, usually the model is you can play most of the game, at least, if not the whole game, you know, free. You can, like, it's possible. Might be a grind, might be a time investment. Maybe certain things are locked off to paying customers via subscription or exclusive currency or something like that, or just straight up buying certain expansions or something like that, right? Like, that tends to be the way that it's done. But you can get most of the experience for free. There is something very unsatisfying about playing a demo and then being like, pay $40 more on your telephone. And I just think that, like, psychologically it rubs people the wrong way. I think that people just don't wanna. To be fair, there are quite a few people who did. I mean, they said 10,000 sales. Maybe most of those, we don't know how much money that translated into. We don't know how much money that translated into, because, mind you, they jacked the price from $10 to $40. I imagine there was a huge fall off between those price changes. Yeah. Do you agree with this? Had you heard of any of these games? Death Stranding iOS. Really? Huh. Okay. What what microtransactions would you have most wanted out of these games if they were going to go down that route? Because that's usually what you see. You usually see, instead of we're going to port, most companies pivoted to, instead of porting games down to a mobile specs, we're going to create a unique game for mobile that is designed with a more mobile friendly business model. Or it's something like, I don't know, Hearthstone, where the game is designed from the ground up to be playable and accessible on PC or on a mobile device. There's no Hearthstone on console. Blizzard, how many? Oh, is Overwatch is on consoles? Yeah, it is. No, it totally is. Yeah, is that the only one that they've got on console? Do they have any other games on console? Oh, I guess. Diablo. They had Diablo 3 and 4. Okay. And Immortal, didn't they? Right? Anyway. Yeah. So, poor Capcom. In other news, the Switch 2 was released. You might have heard of it. The extremely low-key announcement. I thought that the reaction to the Switch 2 reveal was very funny, because maybe it's because I'm firmly in one camp, but I saw people saying it was either cool, Switch 2, or what happened to Nintendo? What happened to that innovative, playful company that was always coming up with new creative ideas? Where's the gimmick? And in my mind, I'm thinking, no, just let them make another Switch. Just please. Nintendo, I don't know how many people realize this. Nintendo was very close to having more failed consoles than successful ones. Okay, like I actually in my head I counted it out. Like, okay, NES successful, SNES successful, N64 flop, GameCube flop, Wii big success, Wii U big failure, Switch big success. They were 4 for 4. NES 1 2 3 4 1 2 3. No. They were before the Switch. They were 3 and 3. Before the Switch, they were 3 and 3. The Switch put them to 4 and 3. This is in sharp contrast to their kind of competitors, although Nintendo hasn't really competed with PlayStation or Xbox in like 15 years or more, very close to 20 years now since the Wii. If you think about it, PlayStation's never had a true failure for a console. PS1's success, PS2 huge success, PS3 failure at the start, but pulled around into a success. PS4 big success. PS5, honestly, for as much as we've ragged on it, pretty successful. It's not a failure. It's around where the PS4 was in terms of sales, like whenever they released their last earnings thing. So, around where the PS4 was at this point in the PS4's life cycle. So it's sold about on par. Also, you have to remember that the PS5 has sort of ingrained itself as like a luxury status symbol at this point, where buying a PS5 or winning a PS5 is like a shorthand for an expensive, desirable item. And I think that like culturally, there's a certain cachet to that, where even if the console isn't a runaway success, there is a kind of prestige to it that the PlayStation brand is going to be just fine. Definitely a very different take, very different reception than the PS3, which was, fuck Sony, these greedy bitches, overpricing their console. Anyway, Switch 2. It's bigger. It has a slightly updated mechanism for the Joy-Cons. The Joy-Cons have like some other features and buttons on them. They have shoulder buttons now. Did the old ones have shoulder buttons? They did, but it was like they only had one, right? I've only used a Switch like 3 times in my life. I'm assuming it's more powerful, probably has a better battery life. It's just an upgrade to the Switch. And you know what? I'm totally fine with that. Nintendo has a good thing going. They have a pretty good... They found like a pretty good niche that doesn't feel gimmicky. I think that that's a criticism you could have made of the Wii, right? The Wii widget was a huge hit when it came out. Changed the console industry. But many accuse it of being gimmicky. And to be fair, yeah, in a lot of ways it was. It was like, there were a lot of games for the Wii which were waggle. Just kind of forced the waggle in. How do we implement motion controls? You know, there were better and worse implementations of it. And I think Nintendo got this kind of idea into their system that, well, now that we did this, now that we've done the Wii, and we have set ourselves up so far apart compared to what the GameCube was versus its competition at the time. We've set ourselves so far apart that now this is kind of our thing. Like, we have to be different and zany. What gimmick do we? What's the next gimmick? What's the next gimmick that we come up with? Like a game, like a touch controller thing. And they first of all, the idea is not like that incredible. It's not as distinct as the Wii was compared to everything else. And also, they just totally bungled the marketing on the Wii U. That's a whole other story. The Switch, the Switch, the Switch was like, after the Wii U, the Switch felt like, okay, we're going to go with another gimmick, but this time it's going to be good. It's like a better gimmick. And they found a nice niche for themselves. It's somewhere between the console, the home console, and the handheld market, a hybrid of sorts. It's small enough that you can fit it in a backpack, but it's powerful enough that you can play a Smash Brothers. You can play an Animal Crossing, right? When I was in high school, there were plenty of kids. Well, not like plenty, but I definitely saw kids on their Switches, at, in between classes or before classes or something, waiting around after school, whatever, just playing on something. Like it was very accessible. It was useful for what it did. It was unique, and it fulfilled a market niche that no one else really was, because there's no other real handhelds now that mobile devices and phones basically replaced the handheld market. But so they recognized that there was still a demand for mobile gaming, on the go gaming, but there wasn't like a thing that was at the time powerful enough, or like you'd have to buy like an external controller, and not everyone wants to buy like the Switch. It hits like a nice middle ground where it pleases a lot of people. It has a unique role, but it's also very widely applicable. It's not like pigeonholed into a certain kind of like, when you're designing for mobile, there's certain limitations. You have to design with you are limited to just what is comfortable on a touch screen. And the Switch was a great idea. It was a great, well-implemented idea. And, oh my God, my neck. And they managed to dig out this hole for themselves and just kind of hunker down and do their thing. And they have been very successful for it. And I totally understand just saying, let's do a bigger, better version of it, which honestly, I think is probably pretty pleasing to a lot of people, to be honest. The Switch was made after the Wii U, when Nintendo was not doing great and didn't have like a ton of free capital to throw around at research and development. That's why it's not that powerful. That's why it's not that big. That's why the controllers are fucked up. That's why the slide thing breaks a lot and the joystick drifts and all that. And like there are clear there's clear concessions made in the construction of the machine, of the build quality. Now that they have a bunch of that Switch money, they can actually invest it into making something a little more cutting edge, that improves spec-wise on the original. And I think that's kind of nice. Like, I guess in the same way the Wii U was sort of like an HD Wii, it was even compatible with the Wiimote, but it was also kind of trying to do its own thing, and you had to account for the big weird tablet controller. I am perfectly okay with Nintendo just kind of doing another better Switch and continuing to iterate on good ideas. Like, the one after the Switch 2 is just they're gonna do something funky again. Right? Like, they will eventually. I'm cool with them playing it a little bit more conservative for a while. Oh yeah, speaking of, like, I in the process of doing this, I was just in bed thinking about consoles, as I usually do. And yeah, every PlayStation console has been successful, and then Nintendo has had a bit of a rocky history. Now they're more in the black, right? They're more they're more on the success than the failure side. Can't say the same for Xbox. They had the OG Xbox. I'd say it was a success, at least for the time. 360, very successful. The X-Bone, not too great. The Series X and S, what? That's when you start hitting the, hey man, what even is an Xbox? Like, what even is a console actually? Like, what is success? Uh-oh. In very minor funny news of things that I was watching from afar, there was a hilarious drama among the Hollow Knight community. Now, if you haven't been keeping up, Hollow Knight, a game that came out, I don't know, like forever ago, a cute little Metroidvania, I say, hating that term, but being forced to use it. A cute little search action game. Actually, I read a really good article about how Metroidvania, one of the reasons it's kind of bad as a term and it's not very descriptive is that really what it means is a structure, in the same way that we say linear and we use linear and open world as descriptors for a game's structure of its setting. And Metroidvania, it describes a certain kind of expanding structure and like trying to come up with better, like what would you call it? Like an expanding world, an unlocking world. I've always used the phrase leapfrog because in my mind, it's like the visual of you have to pass something, you leapfrog over a location and then double back to it later. But I don't know. Maybe that doesn't make sense to anyone else. Anyway, there was a promised expansion. Dude, I'm like really mucusy right now. That's weird. Like I'm breathing and like I feel like it's getting forced out of my nose. There was this promised expansion called Silksong that was, and I can't blow my nose. That's so weird. It's like this deep vetted mucus. Silksong never came out. It has been in development hell for so long that someone at one point at least vandalized the Wikipedia page for the term development hell. Let me see if it's still like that. I was looking it up. Development hell. Yeah, someone changed it. I randomly was looking at I found out that there was a Wikipedia page for development hell. And at the time that I happened to click on it, someone had changed it to say development hell, also known as Silksong. Yeah, basically it's been in development for so long with so little news that the fan base is going a little loopy. Now you might say maybe they should just like play a different game and just wait until some news comes up and maybe like detach themselves a little bit. And they would say, fuck you, dude. I have to be on the Silksong subreddit, which is separate from the Hollow Knight subreddit. Because I am going to obsess over this game that may or may not be canceled. Apparently it's still in development, but who knows what that really means. That could be all lies. So a developer at Team Cherry, the creators of the game, changed his name, handle, and profile picture on Twitter. The name was changed to some weird, like, every sage was right, I think. The name was changed to, the handle was changed to that. The name was changed to reference, like, some brand of wine. And the profile picture was changed to a picture of chocolate cake. And he also tweeted, "Keep your eyes open for big things happening tomorrow." The next day was, wow, how related, the Switch 2 release. The Switch 2 reveal. So people immediately took this as Silksong is confirmed for Switch 2, which personally I think would be obvious. No, it's actually releasing on the N64. I don't know why you would have to confirm that. Maybe they're saying it's a launch title. I don't know. That's like the other things. Is it going to be a launch title? Is it going to be... no clue. And then so people start going absolutely feral and collecting information on the subreddit, culminating in a post, "We demand a statement from Team Cherry." This post is so long, has so many edits and updates to it that I'm not even sure how it's supposed to be read. It does have a thing about the original post, but it also lacks a bunch of context. Essentially what happened was a different developer said, "No, guys, that doesn't mean anything. It's a Portal joke." The cake was a lie. I guess that's the joke. What a topical joke that people totally would have thought in the year 2025. People were thinking it's not some elaborate ARG series of clues that you're meant to piece together. It was just a weird joke, and the guy changing all of his identifying like information on Twitter was just unrelated. Okay. This made people even angrier. As this post goes on. So first of all, the top of the post is hilarious. Update. The Silksong mod started deleting my old posts, even though are forgotten somewhere in the 3rd, 4th page of Reddit. I don't know why. More specifically, they removed the post about Silksong being a bundle of Nintendo Switch 2. This, in my opinion, confirms that the info I had about Silksong launch as Nintendo exclusive, is legit. We did it, guys. Leth, who's a developer, is responding to questions. It's great when there's a whole section called updates after the post was locked. If I scroll down to the original text of the post, a member, if this is true, that means that William, the developer, that William tweet hours before Nintendo Switch reveal was in purpose just to troll us. All caps. A member of Team Cherry decided to post a tweet hours before Switch 2 reveal just to troll after 6 years of silence. And Leth didn't have the courage and professionalism to make a statement and have chosen to speak through a third person. They forgot who made them millionaires. Dude, I doubt they're millionaires. They forgot the Kickstarter backers. They forgot everything. We don't deserve a single update. I don't know what they mean. I don't know if they're using that word properly. A single blog post for 6 years. There's a lot of commas just thrown in here randomly. I have never seen such a disrespect to a community. Also, that confirms the luck of communication between Leth and William, and maybe the reason of the delay on Silksong's development is due to Team Cherry is not a team anymore. Zero communication. Zero respect to the community. Zero business plan. What's that fucking video? There is no aggression, there is no passion, there is no fucking vision. There is no mindset to this football club. So I think there is a component, which is that Silksong was originally promised as an expansion DLC for the original Hollow Knight, which then grew so out of control that they eventually decided to just make it a full-on sequel. So there is a legitimate aspect to this, which is that people paid money and they backed the game, having been promised that their money would go towards a DLC that did not come out. And if the game came out, and I'm assuming they've already said that anyone who backed the game who was entitled to the DLC, that's usually how it goes. If you funded it, you'll get it for free. For free, quote unquote. You won't have to pay again for it separately. Obviously, you paid money for it technically to have it made. I imagine that they would extend that also to whenever the full game comes out, you will also get Silksong without having to pay for it again. So there is a legitimate aspect. I do have to wonder how many of the people who are so obsessed with this actually backed the game to whatever tier it was that entitled them to the Silksong DLC. And how many people just played Hollow Knight afterwards, after it came out, and just really liked it, and are now obsessively following the story. Like, okay, Team Cherry should absolutely honor their commitment to their backers, right? And that is, if the game never comes out, very ethically fucked, right? That is very messed up if they did that. But like, if I did not back the game like that, and I was not waiting on my investment to be like returned to me, I don't know if I would be that interested. Like, okay, there's a couple things that I love that I don't know if they're ever going to come out with the promised thing. I love the Proto Men, one of my favorite bands. I legitimately have no idea if Act 3 is ever coming out. Act 2, I first started listening to them in middle school, and Act 2 came out in when did it come out? 2009. Holy shit. It came out when I was 7? Yeah, I got into that in 2014, 15, when I was in middle school. And at that point, people were already going, damn, it's been a long time. When's Act 3 coming out? And now it's been closing in on 10, 20 years. In a couple, it's been about 15 years, and no word. Well, like a little bit of a word. They had like 2 tracks that they released of it years ago. Literally 10 years ago, they released 2 tracks, which probably wouldn't even be the final versions of those songs on the album because it's been so long at this point. And I love the Proto Men. I love those 2 albums. Never really delved too much into their other stuff, but I love those 2 albums. And if Act 3 ever comes out, I'll totally be there. I'm going to be super psyched about it. I'll be so hyped. But like, I'm not like grinding my teeth into dust over it, I'm not like foaming at the mouth. I'm also a Mega Man fan, so I'm used to waiting for stuff. Ironic, given they are a Mega Man themed band. I feel like at a certain point, you just kind of move on, right? You don't have to stop liking it. You don't have to stop listening to it. You don't have to stop replaying Hollow Knight. But, just like, there's a level of investment that I don't know what you're getting out of it. Of stressing out, obsessing over a potential sequel. I just don't know how like healthy that is as a way of like, as a relationship with media that is made by people you cannot control. I feel like at a certain point, you just gotta take a step back, right? Maybe I'm crazy. What have you been waiting on for years that you don't think is ever going to really come out? And finally, so I mentioned at the top of the show that I got real sick and I couldn't do anything and I didn't have any energy to focus on stuff. But I could like watch stuff, you know, and anything that required, personally, it doesn't take a lot of focus for me to watch things. So, unless it's like very cerebral, you know. So, I watched a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! I probably, in the span of a couple days, I probably watched like 40 episodes of Yu-Gi-Oh! The original series. And I have to talk about it. So, I don't know if I mentioned the fact that I had started the show a while ago. I don't know if I mentioned that, but a while ago, I watched the first roughly half of the original season, the original story arc, Duelist Kingdom. And I just decided, like, okay, well, it's been a bit. I haven't watched the show. Let me keep up with it. Let me finish, at least try to finish Duelist Kingdom. So, my background with the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime really starts when I was a kid and I was visiting my grandparents and they took me to the library and I got a DVD of the entire first season. Gonna be honest, I don't know what that DVD was because I was like curious and I just wondered if I could just find it listed online. It's really hard to find anything that is actually the whole first season. Back then, most of the DVDs that were released, most of the home releases of the anime were like a couple episodes, like maybe 7 or 8 if you're lucky, right? Anything that I could find of the whole season was in some kind of like big Blu-ray, right? Like a modern release. Now, it was definitely like a circa 2000, oh God. I was really young. I was probably 2007 or so DVD release of the whole first season, because I remember watching the entire first season all the way up to the final fight with Pegasus, and I can't find it. It was some mystical DVD that I can't track down. I remember I was so young when I watched it that I didn't have a proper understanding of a lot of the way that the world worked. So, like, I had only ever watched, whenever I had watched a DVD, it was always a movie, right? It was a movie that my family was watching together. I was not used to the idea that you could also have a TV show on it. So I just kind of assumed that I was watching a movie, and my perception of time was so weird as a really little kid that I just thought it was a really long movie that I only noticed when like the sun started going down. I think I had to watch it over 2 days, but I like binged the whole fucking season of like 40 episodes in 2 days, something like that, which is crazy to me. And I was so young that I could only remember these scant little bits and pieces of the episodes. I could only recall a couple like lines of dialogue and a few notable scenes and just a few things that randomly stuck out in my memory for one reason or another. And it was kind of fun to go back and actually get proper context for them. I remember Weevil, the insect-themed duelist, when he gets booted off the island, he's like arguing with this kid on the boat, and he goes, "Stop bugging me!" For some reason, I remember that. Probably because I just registered that it was a bug pun. and that was a kind of a new thing for me. I remember the scene of them, the main characters in like the caves, and Bakura's Millennium Ring pulling them all around. And I remember the fight with Pegasus, because that was the first time that I ever watched something. The first time that I ever got like, holy shit, how is she supposed to beat him kind of thing. He's so strong. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a really interesting show to watch, especially knowing the actual card game. The development of Yu-Gi-Oh! As a franchise is really curious. Like, Magic the Gathering started as a card game. Pokemon started as like a media franchise that then based itself off of existing card games, namely Magic, to make, a from the ground up, essentially adapt the world of Pokemon into a card game. Yu-Gi-Oh! Started as a manga that was just being written as a story where the characters were playing a card game. Kazuki Takahashi was not a game designer. He liked games. He was a game enthusiast. He loved card games like Magic, but he didn't like design them. So he's kind of writing the story. He's a mangaka. He's a storyteller. He's writing the story, and he's doing this because these games are cool to him, and the idea of like summoning monsters with cards and battling them is really cool. So he's just sort of writing the game as he goes and sort of making stuff up as he needs it to exist. The game was not conceived first and then written around. The game was developed based around the story. There also was not a tie-in. There was not like this big multimedia push for Yu-Gi-Oh! At first. It took a little bit for an actual card game to form once the manga was so popular. Because the manga took off really hard. It was very, very successful. So there was also multiple, I think there was like a Bandai version of it at first too, and Konami, and they had like competing Yu-Gi-Oh! Products. Konami's won out in the end, possibly because they called theirs the official trading card game. The official card game. So basically, there's this really odd dynamic to the show where, and you don't really get this until you move past Duelist Kingdom. I didn't really realize how different it could be. So I'll use this. I guess I have to talk about. You need to compare them. So the arc, the major arc following Duelist Kingdom is Battle City. So in Battle City, Kaiba literally comes down and is like, okay, guys, I'm throwing a tournament and we are playing by new official Battle City tournament rules. And these are, for the most part, the rules of actual Yu-Gi-Oh! Because there are some, flagrant things that they are doing in Duelist Kingdom that don't, they are summoning monsters, they don't need to tribute to summon higher level monsters. They're just playing trap cards like spells. There's tons of things that make no sense compared to the actual game. Almost as if they're making it up as they go along. Almost as if there's some author making up the game as he goes along. So once you start getting into Battle City and they start playing by actual rules of the game, a lot of the just made up bullshit from Duelist Kingdom goes away, and the duels get a lot more interesting. It actually makes the show better, in my opinion. So when I say made up, okay, I'll give you some examples about how ridiculous it gets. So first of all, there's just a bunch of mechanics that don't exist in the actual Yu-Gi-Oh! Card game. There's a bunch of typal advantages that are not a thing. they'll be like, oh, water types versus, or aqua types versus, no, they call them water types. Although there's a water attribute versus, water attribute versus fire attribute. And the fire ones are weak to the water ones. And then there's like machine monsters are strong against this and all that. And there's certain ideas that would get sort of cribbed for the final game, like for the actual game. Like there's these sort of like battlefield advantages that certain types of monsters get bonus stats based off of what, like, where the characters are actually playing playing their game on the island in Duelist Kingdom. That kind of eventually became field spells, which there were a lot of these sort of type-specific field spells that were released that benefited different types and disadvantaged others. I think there's really some, like, so that's honestly the more tame stuff. That's like the stuff I understand. There's other things like, okay, I think one of the most ridiculous duels in the whole series comes very early. It's Yugi fighting against this guy called Mako, who has an ocean-themed deck, a whole water-themed deck. So Mako plays this spell that makes it like the ocean, and the field is like no, they're playing on the ocean. So all of his like fish and aqua and sea serpent type monsters get bonuses from that. But the bonuses are like, they can't be attacked and they're like submerged underwater. So Yugi plays this werewolf monster, and then he plays a spell card that's like the moon, and the moon makes his werewolf stronger, but not strong enough. But the moon also affects the tides, and it makes it so that his werewolf gets pulled under the water and just destroyed by Mako's like water monsters. So Yugi plays Giant Soldier of Stone, and in one of the most iconic scenes from the anime, declares, "Giant Soldier of Stone, destroy the moon." And his monster holds up his sword and shoots a beam out and destroys the moon, which causes the tides to recede and dry up, and then the monsters just can't even attack back and have like no stats. Nothing like this is represented in game. Not even close. Not even close. It's like, there is no, it's like, okay, you could maybe say that the waves thing is like a field spell, and the moon, honestly, the moon is Yugi plays it like an equip spell, or maybe his own field spell. But like Giant Soldier of Stone cannot destroy like a spell card on the field. Like there's no rules. There's no rules going on. It's insane. In fact, there's this one episode which is actually technically filler, although it's perfectly like watchable and fits into the story just fine. There's an episode where Taya duels Mai, and it's the first time that Taya actually duels. I guess they wanted to have her duel in an episode because she and Tristan like don't do very much because they don't actually play the game. So Taya is dueling Mai, and Taya, like the whole progression of this duel is that Taya is kind of an amateur, but she's sort of picking it up as she goes along. And she draws a card. It's the trap card Waboku. And she's looking at it, and she's like, oh, this card's really strong, but what does it do again? And I was like, wait, what? Because if you've watched the anime, especially the original one, you'll notice that the cards they play have a very different layout from the actual Yu-Gi-Oh cards that you can buy in Japan or America. And at first I thought that it just had to do with visual clarity, because the cards in the anime are like, the top 90% of it is the artwork, and then the bottom doesn't even have like a name or anything. It's just like the color strip that denotes what type of card it is and a symbol for it. And I just kind of assumed that it was for visual clarity so that you can tell what the characters are doing rather than, you know, them having to draw and then you have to make out like this tiny card with like, right? Like, you get what I mean, right? It's a better viewing experience. Turns out that it actually has a real world justification, which is that due to child advertising laws, I think specifically in Japan, because Yu-Gi-Oh cards are a real product that you can buy, the cards in the anime are not allowed to resemble the real product 1-to-1. It's a little bit silly, you know. It's easily subverted like in how they do in the anime, but that's why, right? So once I learned that, it was like, okay, so visual clarity thing probably might just be a side effect of the real reason, which is for advertising laws. Okay, that makes sense. And then Taya has this line where she's like, what does it do? I hope I can remember. And I'm like, wait, can she not just read the card? When the cards don't, I know that like visually they don't show the cards as having any text. Do they literally not have any text on them at all? What? Is this why it feels like they're just making shit up? Because they literally can't understand what the cards are? Yeah, very silly. So then you get to Battle City, and the duels start using the actual rules. There's like one thing that differs, which is that they have it so that fusion monsters can't attack the turn they're summoned, which I guess is just because they usually play at a lower life total than the actual game. They play it like 2,000 and 4,000, and maybe having a fusion monster be able to attack immediately would make it kind of hard to write around because that's very strong. So, but for the most part, it's like, okay, no, you have to sacrifice card monsters to summon bigger monsters. You have to play polymerization to play a fusion monster, which they don't do all the time in Duelist Kingdom. Trap cards and spell cards work a certain way. And once the game has actual rules to it, the duels get so much better. Like, even minor duels are a lot more interesting just because the characters play with actual coherent strategies that they can that the other characters can understand and respond to. Like, okay, the very first duel that happens is Yugi versus this guy he's called a rare hunter. They're like duelists who they steal rare cards from other players. And this rare hunter guy is playing a gimmicky Exodia deck where he's trying to draw all 5 distinct pieces of Exodia, which will allow him to instantly win the game. If you don't, it's like one of the most iconic things from Yu-Gi-Oh! It's in the very first episode. And Yugi is like, oh shit. So also he's just cheating and he's marked his cards. Yugi picks up on this and he doesn't know how to stop this guy's strategy at first. His whole strategy is to play a bunch of defensive cards, things that stop Yugi from attacking, really high defense point monsters, tons of things to just stall out. It's the whole point of the deck is to stall out and then draw into all your Exodia pieces and then win. And previously, Joey had dueled the same guy, got surprised by this strategy, and could not counter it in time. Yugi figures it out and essentially discovers that he's able to stall himself long enough by doing things that he plays like cards that like for a very long time was banned that like prevent your opponent from drawing during their draw phase, or cards that he does a bunch of stuff to stall out the rare hunter himself and keep him from actually getting all of his cards, all of his Exodia pieces. And then it turns out that the rare hunter actually didn't build his deck very well. He isn't just playing the Exodia pieces, he's playing 3 copies of all 5 pieces. 15 cards in his deck are Exodia. And he keeps drawing into duplicate pieces. If you look at any... So first of all, Exodia has never been a very good strategy in Yu-Gi-Oh! It's always been very gimmicky. But even if you look at the most successful Exodia decks, they only run single copies of every piece. Because if you draw 2 of the same piece, one of them is just a dead card in your hand. Like, it's literally useless. And when your strategy is so volatile and dependent on drawing in a game where draw power is usually very limited, and usually requires you to make a lot of sacrifices as well, then having just a total brick, a total dead card in your hand is really bad and could lose you the game. So you only play single copies so that you can because it's actually the most consistent. So he starts drawing into a bunch. He's got like 2 of the right arm, 3 of the left leg, and his hand is just completely bricked. He can't do shit. He just keeps drawing into duplicates and nothing that's actually going to get him out of this situation or draw him any more cards. And then he's forced into this position where he has to play one of the Exodia pieces as just a monster to actually defend against Yugi. Yugi springs this trap called Chain Destruction, which in the anime targets a card on the field and then it destroys it as well as any copies in the hand or deck. Which literally just completely destroys his strategy. It makes his game unwinnable. And then he just finishes him off from there. And it's like, oh, that's actually like a fun duel. Both characters had understandable strategies, and one of them lost because he constructed his deck poorly and didn't understand rules of, common rules of consistency and stuff like that. And the other character figured that out and happened to have the right cards on hand to counter this strategy and show the flaws in this kind of gimmicky play. Actually, a pretty fun duel, and you can follow along with it, and it like makes sense and stuff. And that's I'm a few more episodes into the arc. And all of the duels since have been relatively cool like that. And it's actually more fun to follow along. Who would have guessed? That establishing rules for the main means of how your characters resolve their conflicts would benefit the viewing experience. Like, if you're going to do any kind of action-focused thing with some sort of fantastical powers or something like that, and you want to be in it for the long haul, kind of helps. It really helps if you're able to actually define the parameters of what everyone can do. That's why people really latch onto things like Nen from Hunter x Hunter or Stans from JoJo, which are these power systems that are very flexible but have these kind of defined rules to them, so that the author can get a little loosey-goosey and a little very, they can get creative with it, but also everything makes sense and you can anticipate things, and you don't feel like characters are just pulling out completely random bullshit all the time. It's very rules based, and there's you can latch into that. In addition to that, Yu-Gi-Oh! The anime is just a total hoot. I don't know how else to say it, but it's such a silly show. Kazuki Takahashi, God bless his soul, rest his soul as well, is really good at writing simple, immediately compelling characters. Yugi is practically like the archetype for I'm trying to think of if you think about like the progression of shonen, I think there's like a very good chance, especially anything based around like a game. Yugi is a really powerful archetype of like a game focused story protagonist, to the degree where I feel like if you were going to write a story like that, it's almost impossible to not draw some comparison to Yugi in how much, even if it's like in how much your protagonist differs from him. He is like this good-natured kid who believes in fairness and dueling honestly, and very cheesy, like believe in the heart of the cards and play honorably and friendship and all that. And it totally works. It totally works on me. He's like this positive energy who just wants to do good and have fun and has a sense of justice. On the opposite end, Kaiba is like the best character in the show. And I think it's really funny that if you ever read about people's responses to them like watching the show, they immediately are like, Seto Kaiba fucking rules. He is so awesome. Like oh my god, like as an archetype of an egotistical rival, he's like a 10 out of 10. He has such a massive ego. He thinks so highly of himself, and he is such a dick. But he does it in this way that is almost charismatic, which is weird. He's not trying to be charming. He's not trying to be likable. He just thinks he's the shit, and he's like a heel practically. That's like kind of his character. He thinks he's the shit, and he has everything to back it up. The skill, the results, everything. That's why the reason he hates Yugi is because Yugi's like the only person who's ever beat him. I guess Pegasus as well. But like these are stains on his ego. These create like big rifts for him. And he has this real chip on his shoulder, and that motivates him even more. Every time Kaiba is involved in the story, it gets better. It gets more interesting, which is why I was so jazzed that Battle City is a very Kaiba-centered arc, because it is his tournament that he's putting on. Like Pegasus is fine. He's a very like, okay, I should mention I'm watching the English dub. One, for like nostalgia's sake, and two, just because I find it just very charming and fun. Pegasus is a super traditional, like gay anime villain. Sorry, he's not gay. He's in love with a woman, but he is, what do the kids say? Gay coded. He is like this like foppish, aristocratic gentleman. He finds the ways that he speaks. He finds these ways to insert J's into words that don't have them. He's always saying, "Oh, Yugi boy, how could you challenge me to a duel? A duel? You don't realize that my monster has more ajack points." He says a jack at one point. He says a jack point. I couldn't believe it. There's this I love Bakura. I didn't realize, I wasn't expecting to like Bakura as much as I did. There's something really funny to me about the idea that like the embodiment of ultimate evil, like who I can already tell is going to be like the main overarching bad guy of the series, is trapped inside the body of this like little British twink who's like, when he's not possessed or acting like he's not possessed, it's like, "Oh, sorry guys, I got a little caught up there. I hope you don't mind." Haha. Like it's ridiculous. And then like it really reels you in, right? it reels you in with these very silly, charming characters who are so, on the surface, so simple, have such simple character traits. And then you're going and going and going and enjoying the show well enough. And then it gets to this point where they're in a really important duel all of a sudden. And like a lot is on the line. And you're like, wait, hang on. And then like you're in the situation, like Yugi is dueling Kaiba to enter Pegasus's castle. Pegasus has kidnapped Kaiba's little brother Mokuba, who's the only person he actually cares about, although he would hate to admit it, is the only person that he really cares about, which you can tell by his actions. Kaiba's kidnapped his little brother Mokuba and has also stolen the soul of Yugi's grandfather. And Pegasus is bringing them to this island. He's luring them to this island so that he can basically collect Yugi's Millennium Puzzle. He wants all the Millennium items, which is what like everyone wants in this show. And in order to get into the castle, Pegasus says, okay, Kaiba, you got to go outside and duel Yugi. And this is when Yugi was trying to get in at the same time. So basically, whoever wins gets to proceed. And you're at this point where you're like, damn, hey, I actually don't know who I want to win this more. Do I want Yugi to win, who I already like a lot as a protagonist, or do I want Kaiba to win, who's like the most awesome character? And I'm watching, and it's a back and forth, and both of them are gaining these big advantages, and then the other one makes this big comeback, and you start like leaning forward, and you're like, wait, hang on. And then this character who you really like, who's in this make or break situation, suddenly it all comes down to one draw off the top of their deck, and I'm like standing up. I'm standing up and my hands are on my head and I'm like, oh my God, dude, what the fuck is going to happen? What the fuck is going to happen? Like, who's going to win? Who's going to win? What the fuck is going to happen? And now I'm hooked. And now I'm super invested in what's going on. And that's how he gets you. That's like the art of Yu-Gi-Oh! I remember watching the first season of Yu-Gi-Oh! GX back when I was in high school. And the same thing happened. It's like this funny, silly, like battle school card game anime. And then fucking Manjome, my man, has this huge character development arc where he goes from like a rich kid bully and he gets humbled and then he comes back like completely changed. And he's like, fuck you, Dad. I'm not going to be like you or my older brothers anymore. And then he's dueling Jaden, or Judai, I think is his name in the Japanese dub. And you're like, holy shit. What's going to happen? I'm so invested. That's the art of Yu-Gi-Oh! That's the magic. When I was a kid, the series that was coming out was 5Ds. And I also remember that series being really cool, although my memories of it are also pretty hazy. And I think that there's something to be said about how Yu-Gi-Oh's popularity can be traced to the fact that for the better part of 15 to 20 years, they had very solid, like really good, no wait, probably let's say 10 to 15 years. They had like really solid anime running, like all the time, back to back. With cool characters and pretty decent story arcs. I've heard like conflicting things about different, this season's not as good. This season of this series isn't as good, But for the most part, I mean, it's kind of impressive how consistent this show is, where they can actually turn out a pretty good anime. Yeah. Oh, the other thing. Once you get into Battle City, usually when you get a big lore drop about there's all this important stuff in the lore going on, I kind of roll my eyes a little bit and I'm like, okay, I really dig all the Egyptian stuff in Yu-Gi-Oh. I'm really into all the magical Egyptian nonsense with, dude, like, I don't know if this is like a pertinent spoiler, like if you really care, but you go through like 40, 50 episodes of these characters, and then you get to like Battle City, and a new character shows up called Ishizu. She's like, I'm an archaeologist. I'm doing an ancient Egypt exhibit. And she talks to Kaiba. And you discover that Yugi and Kaiba are not just Japanese teenagers. They are the reincarnations of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh and evil sorcerer, respectively, who dueled by summoning giant monsters in ancient Egypt and are like destined to fight again and again throughout history. So like destiny, the past is repeating. Yugi and for some reason they have both reincarnated as Japanese teenagers. And Yugi and Kaiba aren't just at odds because of their circumstances, but literal fate. And in most cases, I would kind of roll my eyes and go, okay, whatever. Like you're kind of bringing it away from the character-focused motivations for why this rivalry exists and why any of this is important, and you're taking it to some kind of like, it's because of shit that no one in the story is involved with that happened in the distant past. Usually that would be my response, but for some reason, I think this is so cool. And actually, no, I do know why. It's because the Pharaoh is literally a character. This is something that they kind of establish as Duelist Kingdom goes on. But obviously, like, okay, there's this funny thing where when Yugi duels, he grows like 2 feet tall and gets different clothes, and his makeup changes. He gets like new like eyeliner. And the characters will be like, have you ever kind of gotten the impression Yugi changes a little bit? Like, he kind of seems like a different person when he duels. And you're like, yeah, he grows 2 feet and changes clothes instantly. Did no one's picking up on this? I guess no one here is able to read the cards either. And they start establishing what is actually going on. Like, they don't acknowledge it. It's implied that for a while it's kind of subconscious that this happens to Yugi. But eventually they establish by the end of Duelist Kingdom that the Millennium puzzle that Yugi wears around his neck, like is the pyramid necklace thing he's got, has the soul of the ancient pharaoh Atem, who is like trapped inside and takes over for him in times of need. Like, he lends him his strength and his like ability to top deck really well. So Atem is a character, right? He is a character in the story, and there's a sort of intrigue about, well, who is he? What's the nature? Because he doesn't know. His memories are locked. There's this cool episode where they go inside of his mind, and it's just like this MC Escher type complex of staircases and doors, and everything's locked and mysterious. And he has all these memories that have been sealed away that even he doesn't know about. He doesn't really know who he is. And so this is kind of like a new thrust for the characters, is finding out who Atem is and what the nature of the puzzle is. This is how Yugi gets introduced himself to all this crazy reincarnation mumbo jumbo. And I think that's really what grounds it. Is I like the relationship between Yugi and the Pharaoh. I like the fact that the show kind of starts to separate them as characters, but it keeps Yugi as like a voice in the Pharaoh's head when he transforms, and vice versa. The Pharaoh is almost like, he's kind of like a mentor to Yugi, and they work together as opposed to just the Pharaoh taking over. Like in the final duel with Pegasus, one of the reasons it's cool is because not only is it like the culmination of everything, it's also that Pegasus's whole gimmick, like his whole cheat, is that he has the Millennium Eye, and the eye allows him to read his opponent's mind. So the counter strategy that Yugi and the Pharaoh come up with is that they switch every other turn that they do, every other move that they make. They switch. So one doesn't know what the other put down, and therefore Pegasus can't read their mind as well and respond to what they're doing or anticipate what they're plan around what they're playing. And they intentionally start separating, which is kind of neat. And the story starts understanding them as different characters. It's cool. It's neat. There's a very cute episode where Yugi sets up a date essentially between the Pharaoh and Taya because like all of his other friends are jocks. And according to him, Taya gives good advice. And it's cute. It's literally just them spending the day out, and Yugi intentionally transforms into the Pharaoh on the spot. And I think that's the fact that like one of the characters who is involved in this whole reincarnation stuff is in the story as an active character who I like. Battle City is also one more quick thing. Battle City is also where like all the iconic designs of the characters come up. You kind of get the sense that the first season was a little bit budget. This is only vaguely related. I feel like Joey is always off model. He's always off model. They never draw his hair, the shape of his face, his features. Like it's never drawn the same way between two shots. It's really weird. You get to Battle City, it starts to get kind of standardized and they figure out how to actually draw him. It's very funny. But this is where like the iconic designs come from that you'll see on like promotional material and stuff. This is where Yugi switches to the black tank top, and when he switches to the Pharaoh, he wears the jacket over his shoulders like a cape. This is where the white trench coat Kaiba comes from with like the big metal studs and everything. Pretty sure this is like, I don't think Joey dresses that differently, but like those designs for the characters are the looks for them. That would be that you'll find on everything, all the packaging, covers of games and stuff. It looks so sick. Kazuki Takahashi's fashion sense, I think, is very underrated. So many of the characters have this really cool vibe to them. They look very stylish in a way that feels pretty timeless. There is a real inherent humor to Yugi being like this little 4-foot tall shrimp boy, but also like he wears like a giant leather belt choker and eyeliner and stuff. And who is dressing this boy? A lot of not everyone. There's a couple duds, you know, but so many of the characters dress in this weird stylish way. I love that Bakura, the fucking super evil guy, just wears like a green, kind of like weird light green jacket and a striped shirt, like a blue and white stripy shirt, and he's just a super evil guy. There's something so casual about it that I find really compelling. Yeah. I think it's totally worth going back to. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has an incredible first episode, just to end this out. Ironically, talking about the first episode. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has an incredible first episode. You get so much stuff from there. It is crazy how much is established in just that like 20-minute span. You get all the characters, their personalities, the basic premise of the game. You get Yugi and Kaiba. You get the Blue Eyes White Dragon. You get Dark Magician. You get Exodia. You get like, you activated my trap card. Just so much immediate iconography from the series in one episode. It's crazy. again, like Kazuki Takahashi, you could probably poke holes in his writing or say this or that is kind of silly, but the guy was really talented at at writing stories that were just so immediately engrossing that you're just like, oh, I love this. this is awesome. Yeah. Rest in peace. And with that, I think I'm going to draw this episode to a close. Feels good to podcast again, finally. I know that this episode is also kind of late because I got distracted by stuff. Yeah. So, if you have been listening this far, thank you so much for listening to me ramble. If you have a question, feel free to write it down in the comments below, but please phrase it in the form of a question because I'm not just going to read your thoughts out loud. Video coming up. And hopefully by the end of the month, I think so. Getting sick might have delayed it, but yeah. I have a Patreon and a coffee you can support me on. Whatever. I got nothing else to plug. Bye.